All right, buckle up, buttercups. We're diving headfirst into a hot button issue today, the ever present, always controversial topic of U.S. foreign policy, specifically in our own backyard, Latin America. The clip we are about to watch pulls no punches, dissecting the Trump administration's approach to Venezuela and the potential fallout. We're talking about everything from drug trafficking claims to regime change and the classic you break it, you own it mentality. It's a complex web of geopolitics, domestic implications, and a whole lot of questions about accountability. So grab your popcorn because this isn't just about what happened, but what it means for us and whether history truly repeats itself or just rhymes. Let's roll the tape.
If this was about drug trafficking, then why did President Trump just pardon the former president of Honduras, who was convicted of sending hundreds of tons of drugs into the United States?
Okay, hold up right there. That's a classic mic drop moment, isn't it? The speaker's hitting us with a big fat gotcha. If the whole Venezuela move was really about drug trafficking, then why pardon a former Honduran president convicted of exactly that? It's a fair question, and it instantly makes you wonder about the true motivations behind any political action. This isn't just about Trump, though. It's a pattern we see across administrations, regardless of party. The official narrative often feels, well, a little too neat, doesn't it? When you're dealing with international relations, there are always layers upon layers of interest, economic, strategic, humanitarian sometimes, and of course, the domestic political considerations. To simplify it down to just drugs or democracy can feel disingenuous, especially when contradictory actions pop up. It's like when you tell your kids they can't have candy because it's unhealthy, and so, but then you sneak a chocolate bar later that night, and the kids might not say anything, but they see the inconsistency. Voters are the same. We hear the official line, but then we see actions that don't quite fit, and it erodes trust. It makes you ask, is this really about drug trafficking, or is that just the easiest, most digestible reason to sell to the public for a much more complicated and perhaps less palatable strategic objective? The truth is, foreign policy is rarely black and white. There are always trade-offs and compromises, and sometimes those compromises involve making deals with unsavory characters or overlooking past transgressions for a perceived greater good. But when those actions directly contradict the stated reason for another more aggressive intervention, it absolutely deserves scrutiny. It's not about being anti-intervention or pro-intervention. It's about transparency and consistency in the reasons we're given. Because if the reasons don't add up, what are the real reasons?
So all of the purported explanations for what's happened here don't stand up to logical scrutiny. The president has never articulated a coherent rationale for having done this. And so, in the immortal words of General Colin Powell, you break it, you own it. And it's one thing to do that on the other side of the world. It's another thing to do that so close to home here in our hemisphere. I don't know if they have any plan for what to do now that they have invaded, bombed, and removed the president of that country. But
and the administration kind of sort of laid a little bit of it out in its national security strategy that it came out with a little while ago. That said, this is the interesting question. Donald Trump wanted to get rid of Maduro in his first term. Marco Rubio, as you said, is very determined to have gotten rid of Maduro and says that there's nothing else to happen now that they've got him. The question is what happens, because Venezuela is a tricky country, and we don't necessarily know what the plan is hereafter.
He called into Fox and Friends and effused about how he felt like he was watching a television show when he was watching the feed of what was going on there, which is it's just disheartening to have a president who's that. I mean, nobody thinks that Maduro is a good guy or has a lot of confidence in the way that he was holding on to power. But again, the president of El Salvador calls himself the world's coolest dictator, or whatever it is that phrase is that he uses for himself. If it is now the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine that we invade and remove the leadership of every country where that's true, I mean, the whole justification for J.D. Vance's selection onto the vice presidential ticket was supposedly his distaste for and commitment against America getting involved in regime change wars. It's just whatever you thought you were buying when you bought this presidency, this was not what they had on offer.
We don't often succeed in the second part of this, the regime change part, but it's not even obvious that that's happened. For instance, we're getting reporting that the vice president of Venezuela may be in Russia at this point. But this isn't necessarily regime change. Venezuela is a country of 28 million people, many of whom are impoverished with out of control inflation. We may have just bought ourselves a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, part of the idea of you break it, you bought it, the Pottery Barn Rule problem, right?
The Pottery Barn Rule. You break it, you own it. That's a phrase that haunts every foreign policy decision maker, or at least it should, because what the speaker is hinting at here is the brutal reality that intervention, especially military intervention, isn't a clean surgical strike. It's more like trying to fix a leaky faucet with a sledgehammer. You might stop the leak, but you've probably also shattered the sink and flooded the kitchen. Venezuela isn't just a dot on a map. It's a nation of 28 million people, many already struggling. The idea that we can just waltz in, remove a leader, and then everything will magically stabilize is frankly naive. History is littered with examples of well-intentioned, or at least well-justified, interventions that spiraled into decades of chaos, instability, and unintended consequences. Think Iraq, think Afghanistan. These aren't just problems on a spreadsheet. They're human lives, entire societies disrupted, and the creation of power vacuums that often get filled by something far worse than what was there before. And when you consider that this is happening in our own hemisphere, the stakes are even higher. We're not talking about a distant land. We're talking about a neighbor. The ripple effects of destabilization, increased migration, drug flows, regional conflicts don't just stay within Venezuela's borders. They spill over, directly impacting our own security and economy. It's not just about owning the problem in a theoretical sense. It's about dealing with the very real, very tangible consequences right at our doorstep. So when we talk about breaking it, let's be clear, we're talking about breaking a country, its infrastructure, its social fabric, and potentially its future. And owning it means committing to decades of nation building, humanitarian aid, security presence, and a financial cost that makes the initial intervention look like pocket change. Do we as a nation have the appetite, the resources, or frankly, the plan for that kind of open-ended commitment? Because if not, the Pottery Barn Rule isn't just a warning, it's a guarantee of a much bigger mess.
But when you're talking about our own hemisphere, once you start doing that here, I mean, we already are incredibly intertwined in terms of our fates with Central and South America that drive migration flows to this country for people who are looking for a better life. Well, if we're going to start invading and removing the presidents of countries in Central and South America, that is going to not exactly be a stabilizing factor in terms of what happens with migration flows, with economic integration, with gangs, with with transnational cartel behavior, with drug flows. If they really were the best and brightest in an unironic sense, this would be an incredibly risky thing to do. But instead, it's these guys to be managing what may be an open-ended commitment here, to manage the fallout from what we have just started and apparently have set the precedent that we're willing to do anywhere. I don't think a lot of people have a lot of confidence in the Trump administration as it's currently constituted to manage what may be a fairly wild series of consequences here.
And you can either stabilize a country and a region through regime change, or you can destabilize it. More often than not, we've destabilized it. Even when sober people are in charge of the operation, you bring up an important point that people have been talking about this, or this administration has been referring to Venezuela as a source of drugs. Venezuela is so destabilized. If it becomes more destabilized, what it does is it causes, Colombia has seen this, that Colombia is moving troops to its border because they're expecting an outflow of asylum seekers and refugees who also try and make it to the United States.
I mean, Brazil had a sort of Trump-ish the authoritarian leader in Jair Bolsonaro, who tried to pull off the same kind of effort at a coup that President Trump tried on January 6th. It didn't succeed. He was prosecuted, and the U.S. has now sanctioned Brazil in punishment for having tried to protect its election system from an effort at violent overthrow. You know, why would we be taking completely opposite takes on these pretextual issues with different South American and Central American countries? Have the Honduran former president pardoned inexplicably by Donald Trump after he put some of Trump's friends on his payroll, after that guy was convicted of smuggling hundreds of tons of cocaine into the United States for their actions are proven to not be the reasons for their actions. You have to ask yourself what it's really for. And in this case, I hope we learn something real about that from this president this hour.
This has been a very unusual situation. We have 15,000 troops off of the coast of Venezuela. We've got an aircraft carrier strike group. We've got F-35s in Puerto Rico. This is set up. We're not quite sure how this all happened because they're talking about a capture that they dragged him out of his bedroom. There's a way this could have worked out differently.
Yes, absolutely. And again, we don't know the justification for the action overall. And he is not unique. He is not, this is not the first sort of iteration of this type of leader we have seen around the world. And one thing that we know about this type of sort of would-be strongman is that questions of legality and illegality are ones that I think that to the extent that this can be defined in the United States as having been an illegal action, I actually think Trump will see that as a political plus, and he will lean into that. He will not only will he not care about people saying this is illegal, he'll see that as an asset and he'll want to play that up.
Whoa, that's a bold claim right there. The idea that a president might see an illegal action as a political plus is, well, it's certainly a unique perspective, and it speaks volumes about the current political climate. It suggests a calculated defiance, almost a performative breaking of norms, to appeal to a certain segment of the electorate that values strength and disruption over adherence to traditional legal frameworks. Now, whether you agree with that assessment of President Trump or not, the underlying concept is incredibly important. When any leaders start viewing legal constraints not as boundaries, but as obstacles to be overcome for political gain, that's when we start treading on thin ice. The rule of law isn't just some dusty old book. It's the bedrock of our republic. It's what prevents us from descending into arbitrary power and potential tyranny. The speaker also touches on something absolutely critical: congressional authorization for war. This isn't just a bureaucratic hurdle. It's a fundamental tenet of our Constitution, designed by the founders to prevent exactly this kind of unilateral executive action. Giving one person the power to plunge us into conflict without the full debate and consent of the people's representatives is a recipe for disaster. It bypasses the checks and balances that are supposed to protect us from hasty, ill-conceived wars. So when any president seems to disregard these legal and constitutional boundaries, whether for perceived political advantage or otherwise, it's not just a minor infraction. It sets a dangerous precedent. It chips away at the foundations of our governance, making it easier for future leaders to do the same. And that, my friends, is a far more insidious problem than any single foreign policy blunder. It's a threat to the very fabric of our democracy, regardless of who's in the Oval Office.
I also think that would-be strongmen and authoritarian leaders like to start wars. They like to start wars, I think, both for ego and sense of purpose, but also because they like the expanded powers that war tends to give leaders domestically at home.
One of the things that David Rode, who's with us this morning, was pointing out is that it's not clear yet, but it does seem like congressional authorization was not sought for this action, is where you bump up against that law. So he may not be as troubled by it, but this morning we're hearing from members of Congress, we'll have some on the show, and from members of the Senate from both parties who feel that the bombing of those boats off of Venezuela was illegal.
One is that I think a lot of previous presidents have broken those rules. And so we inherit from President George H.W. Bush in Panama, right? Like we inherit from George W. Bush in terms of his invasion, right? We inherit a presidential this idea that Congress controls whether or not we go to war, and I sincerely hope that in my lifetime we will get back to the founders' vision of who's supposed to declare war and how we're supposed to do it. But Donald Trump won't be the one to have broken that. Blatantly flouting the law, he would choose the latter because I think he thinks that makes him seem strong, and because I think he thinks that essentially doesn't just break the law in sense of violating the law, it breaks the law in terms of its ability to constrain him in the future. And I think that he'll see illegality in this case as a plus.
And that brings us to the end of a really thought-provoking discussion. What we've seen today isn't just about one administration or one country. It's about the timeless challenges of power, accountability, and the consequences of our actions on the global stage. From the complexities of justifying intervention to the harsh realities of nation building and the critical importance of adhering to the rule of law, these are conversations we must keep having. Your voice matters in this. What are your thoughts on these interventions? Do you think the Pottery Barn Rule is truly unavoidable? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next breakdown. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep questioning everything.